Hey everybody, it's Charles from HumbleMechanic.com. Today taking your questions on misfires, Atlas noises, fuses blowing, and more. This is episode 229 of the Humble Mechanic Podcast. If you guys want to get a question on a show like this, email me, charles@HumbleMechanic.com, and put question for Charles in the subject. Ask that question right at the very top, hit the enter button, then give me the details of your question. That helps out so much when going through all the emails and questions that I get every single day. Also, if you don't see your question on a show like this, be sure to hit that quick videos playlist on YouTube where I do one question per video. And remember, these shows are also in audio only format if you want to check that out on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, and of course at humblemechanic.com. All right, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is CRP Automotive. CRP deals in a ton of OE maintenance and repair parts, timing belt kits, suspension components, and even fluids. In fact, they make the factory DSG fluid for Volkswagen and Audi. So check them out at crpautomotive.com. And finally, if you guys want exclusive content discounts to places like Black Forest, Eastwood, MT Knives, Sonic Tools, Mycanic, Petrolbox, Prime Shades, and a whole bunch more, check out the Crew Membership program. Great way to score some awesome discounts as well as help support the show. All right, that's finished up. Let's hit these questions. First one comes from Martin, and he's got a P2146 code. Good morning, Charles. I saw some of your YouTube videos and I trust your knowledge. Sucker. Just kidding. Thanks, Martin. I appreciate that. Contacting you to get a technician's opinion on an error code that I'm getting on my 2011 GTI. I'm getting misfires on cylinder 1 and 4, exactly the same quantity, and this happens sporadically when I press and hold the pedal or just driving it. I did a little research and it looks like there's a high potential of the harness being bad of the injectors or the ECM. I'm leaning towards the ECM because the quantity of misfires and the fact that the circuit is not open all the time. Any input would be greatly appreciated. So I looked up this 2146 code and it looks like an injector electrical circuit type code. Martin, I'll be honest, I haven't ran into this one, but before I went replacing the magic silver box, I would really take a hard look at that harness. Not only do you have the harness that the injectors actually plug into, but like you mentioned, you have it that goes back up to the ECM. But there is a junction for that little pigtail where the injectors plug in, and it's right below the intake manifold. If you pop your hood and look down, you'll see the throttle body. Just to the driver's side of the throttle body is a connection junction where there's a bank of 3 connectors. That is where I would start. I would disconnect them. The green one is for the knock sensor, so you don't need to worry about that one. And I forget which of the other 2 the injector circuit is on, but disconnect both of the other 2 that aren't green and look at it and see if you have corrosion, a loose pin, anything that looks suspicious. Start your car, let it run, and this is great if you can monitor misfires with a scan tool like VAGCOM, OBD11, or whatever it is, because you can set your computer up underneath the hood and wiggle the connector and watch the misfire counter and see if it does anything weird. See if you begin to get that 1 in 4 like steady misfire. You know, thinking about the ECM and being a sporadic issue with it is very possible, but to me, the likelihood and the gut feel I have is this is way more likely to be either a wiring issue at that connection, an injector that maybe isn't plugged in all the way, and the bad part is they're really challenging to get to the connectors and do any kind of testing on. What I'm thinking of is I'm still going to watch that same misfire counter. Maybe I'm taking a screwdriver at the injector connector and kind of like wiggling it on the connector to replicate a wiggle test that you would do with your hand. That might be a reasonable option. I would also, if we were diving deep into this problem, I would look at the wiring diagram and see where all of the inputs come in and all the signals go out for the injectors. Maybe there's an ECM power supply relay. Maybe there's other faults in the ECM that are pointing towards a more global problem, but you're just seeing the symptom produce itself as injector problem. That could be another thing I would want to look at too. So my gut says it's probably not an ECM, at least not the silver magic box, but I would want to look at my ECM grounds. I would want to check powers, and again, wiring is kind of where I'm going. It makes more sense to me that it's an intermittent wiring issue. Think about maybe high load, the harness is getting pulled in different directions, maybe high heat, maybe colder temperatures. You know, there's no ambient conditions for that fault, so I'd look at that. Whenever you pull a fault with one of these more modern OBD2 cars, it should give you a whole list of parameters that say, hey, the fault happened at this RPM, at this time, on this date. If you have a factory scan tool, it'll tell you the date and time and it's sometimes right. But the bigger ones are the RPM, the battery voltage, the coolant temperature, the ambient air temperature. All the things that the ECM is seeing around this fault is captured when the fault is stored. So look at that stuff, and then we can begin to replicate that scenario and that RPM at that temperature and do our wiggle testing or pin drag testing, depending on how deep you really need to go. But dude, start there. ECMs are not cheap. They're not easy to replace. I mean, the physical R&R isn't hard, but then you have to go in and program it. And if you don't have a factory replica scan tool or a factory scan tool, that's something you're gonna have to pay someone else to do. So these little tests will save you a bit of time before you have to make that next step of possibly putting in ECM, hopefully not, maybe just a wiring repair or something small time like that. Next up is from Mark. I'm working on a 2010 Golf TSI. Vehicle was towed to my shop with a no start issue. Check engine light. Compression was good, but noticed a lot of chain noise. Replaced both balance shafts and timing chains with new upgraded tensioner and cam bridge. Chain noise is gone, but no start. Found 2 ignition coils were not sparking. Put 4 coils in it. Now the engine runs, but the idle is hunting, and we have a camshaft correlation code coming up. Yikes. Double checked all the alignments again, but still same code. What else do you think could be causing the issue? So this is a weird one, Mark. My initial thought, of course, would be like, let's go back and double check our timing and make sure that it's correct. What you really, and forgive me, Mark, because I'm not sure how familiar you really are with this engine, but what you really need to make sure in your timing is not so much the gear to the 3 timing chains, right? So you have the balance shaft at the back, then you have the timing chain, the one that actually connects to the camshaft, and you have the oil pump drive at the front. Those 3 chains and that gear and all their accessories, right, all the things they drive, can all be timed correctly. And what's not timed correctly is that gear to the crankshaft itself. There's a very tiny, tiny, tiny little key on the gear, and as these engines wear out, or anytime really, almost anytime you have a chain break or a tensioner fail, that little thing can get sheared off. Also, if you didn't use the little donut that goes around the bolt for the crank gear when you were doing the work, odds are you got it off. And it can be very, very close and still be off. We found this out the hard way on the very first TSI we ever timed, and the dude did it. He did it like 5 times before I got involved. I did it twice. I'm like, something's not right. What we ended up doing is confirming 100% that the crankshaft gear and the crankshaft assembly were timed properly. So what you can do is you can rotate the engine up to TDC number 1 and take a straw, or if you're careful and don't just plunk it down, something like a screwdriver, and make sure 100% that when your gear, right, your lower gear and your camshafts say we're at TDC, we're happy, that your number 1 piston is also at TDC. Because if you're off just a little bit, you can get that camshaft crankshaft correlation code. I'm gonna bet, like I'm gonna almost guarantee bet money type deal. The more I talk about it, the more it really feels right that that's where your issue is. It is in the crankshaft gear to the crankshaft assembly. It's a really weird design. If you don't follow the repair manual 100%, you will get it wrong. I almost guarantee you that. I've seen it happen a bunch. It's happened to me. And I can easily see, especially if your shop doesn't do a lot of these, that being the case. So go back. This is going to be really easy, dude. Take number 1 spark plug out. Take the coil, of course, out. Rotate the engine around to where your pulley and your cover, your lower cover, show TDC. It doesn't matter whether it's compression or not, because the piston should also be up at the top. If you set that to TDC and you start cranking and that piston's still coming up, you don't have your timing right. Or you can take that screwdriver down as your timing mark is a little before TDC. And if you're not going up and down in relation to TDC, then that's where your problem is. And again, this is a quick check, like 7 minutes. It's probably gonna take you longer of like incremental cranking of the crankshaft around to actually do that than rather to check it. But dude, go that route. It'll run. Because the Tiguan we had to do this on, it ran. It started up fine and it ran, but check engine light immediately came back on. So depending on how far off you are, that could be your issue. Check that first. Look for vacuum leaks. Make sure that there's not a giant leak in the charge cooler system or the intercooler's not broken or something like that. Dude, I'd start there, and then we go to the maybe less than happy place of something else being wrong. If you have to fix it, that kind of sucks because you're taking the cover off and the pulley and going all the way back into doing it. But at least you'll know for sure with that really quick check to make sure you got the crank gear and the crankshaft assembly, the key is the crankshaft, timed together correctly. All right, next one up is from George. My question is, what causes me to keep having to pull this fuse? My name is George, I'm from Colorado, and I'm very jealous of your R32. Thanks, man, I appreciate that. I have a 99 Mark IV GTI VR6 that underwent a 1.8 turbo swap. So it was a VR, now it's a 1.8. At random intervals, I will lose the ability to control my windows, interior lights, and dim will hardly work. The door actuators and locks will act funny or straight not work. What causes this issue and what can I do to fix it? Also worth mentioning, previous owner did an LED interior swap and I replaced the convenience module a few months ago. Thanks for your advice. Okay, you replaced the convenience module. That would have been probably an early step or at least an early check. So first we need to check our faults in our our convenience module. That may point us into the direction of the component. You said pull the fuse. So I'm a little concerned, is the fuse blowing and you're having to replace it? Are you pulling the fuse out for the convenience module and putting it back in? And that's making the system start to work? I'm not really clear on that. Does it just start working again by itself or does it actually pop the fuse? Because I've seen a lot of things like the overhead console lights blow that convenience module fuse, or the door lights will blow the convenience module fuse. Those things will be problematic. Convenience modules, of course, can make this happen. One thing I would start with is where that fuse is for the convenience module and look on your little fuse placard card. Pull the fuse out and look at the terminals and make sure there's no damage to it. Make sure they're not spread open too far. Make sure there's no burn spots in it. That can intermittently cause a problem. We also want to check all those grounds underneath the dash. That is a pretty common place, not like pollen filter housing common, but a somewhat common place for water intrusion. And I've seen a lot of issues with water intrusion on that side of the car, getting in relays, getting in modules, getting in wiring, and all that kind of stuff. So my first thing would be to pull all the trim I could off of that driver's side and look. Make sure the carpet's not wet. I know the carpet thing is more of a Passat issue, but you want to look anyway. Make sure that the ground at the A-pillar and on the steering column are both good. Make sure that there's no unhappiness inside the fuse panel. You'll probably find your issue there. What you can also do is have your car running after you take all those panels off and turn all the gadgets on that quit working and wiggle test everything. You know, get your hand up there and start wiggling harnesses. See if you can force it to do it. And when you force it to do it, now you have a little bit easier time of trying to diagnose what the problem is. So do those things first. It's a little bit intrusive to pull all those panels down, but in like 6 minutes you can have them all down. Just be careful because they get fragile, really fragile after having been on the car for a while. So start there, man, and move out and see what you can find that way. And then short of that, I really don't have like it's this every single time type answer like I probably did for the last question. This is going to take some digging and some wiggle testing and whatnot, but I think you'll be able to find it that way. And again, take a really good look at that fuse connection. What you can even do is operate the windows and wiggle the fuse with your thumb and see if you can force the contact to break and get the window to stop working. That might be a really easy thing to do before you pull all those panels off. In fact, I'd probably start there because that one is the easiest. Last one up is from Adam, and this is cool. This is our first Atlas problem question. Sorry, Adam, that it has to be your car, but I'm excited about the question. This is a 28 Atlas SEL VR6, and he's got a problem accelerating from a near stop. For example, roll through a stop sign. Not that Adam ever does that. Adam stops completely at every stop sign, of course, but he'll get a loud noise described online as a whooshing or a squealing or metallic noise. It's a hard one to nail down in terms of description. There are even some videos that have been posted where you can hear it. I checked out the videos that Adam sent me, and I think I could hear it, but I couldn't do anything about it, right? And I heard more wind noise than anything. A lot of discussion has narrowed it down to the transmission is in third gear and you don't completely stop. The transmission doesn't downshift below third gear. It seems to be more prevalent under high loads, for example, uphill versus flat. If you keep it in third with a manual mode, you can reproduce it at the correct RPM, which is 1,000 to 2,000 RPM. This may very well be a normal condition for this engine transmission, but still I would like to know the source of the noise. Heard speculation of intake manifolds opening, something to do with the start-stop feature of the transmission. It's clearly common as people are hearing it and may very well have been all of them because, as you know, the majority of people don't pay attention. That's true, they really don't. All right, Adam, so I haven't directly experienced this noise. I did, when I did that Atlas review, and the Tiguan too, had some concerns about that situation that Adam describes, which we always call the tip-in. As you come to a stop but don't stop, let's say the light is red, you're slowing down, light turns green, you don't ram the throttle, you just accelerate normally back into it and go. VW has almost always had a problem in that scenario. It largely becomes from the predictive nature of the transmission computer. It's seeing slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down, let off brake, hit throttle faster than the computer can respond. Computer goes, ah, and then goes back into its normal drive mode. It's that little bit of freak out moment. My Passat, my B5.5 Passat does it. The Mark IV 2 liters with the AG4, the 4-speed transmission, were the worst, period, about that situation causing a really, really harsh shift. I don't know what's causing it. An issue inside the transmission does make the most amount of sense because you're basically starting to lug the engine. The transmission is still in third when if you were driving a manual transmission and did that same scenario, you'd probably be accelerating in second or would have downshifted into second. Remember that everything these cars do now is for two things, emissions and fuel economy, which go definitely hand in hand. So it's going to maybe behave a little odd in one certain scenario because in all the other scenarios, it's dealing with emissions controls. And yes, the TCM is a vital player in the engine strategy for controlling emissions, and that's been the case for damn near ever. So I'm going to go actually to the dealership the next time I'm up there. I'm going to drive one, and I'm going to see if I can duplicate the concern because I'm really interested to hear that noise. I did some searching on the VW side. I didn't really find anything that pointed to that. If what the internet is describing is correct, and it is a transmission noise, to me, that seems like it'd be very easily rectified with software. But again, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm not saying VW is going to have a software update, as we talked about last week. I don't do that. I got in trouble for that. So I don't pretend to know what VW is doing with their software. But we'll leave that one alone beyond that. So the truth is, Adam, I don't know. Again, it does make sense to me that this would be a transmission concern, almost like a lugging if you were in a manual transmission and you were in the wrong gear and started to give it some throttle. And the engine was or the transmission, excuse me, was in the wrong gear. So I might play around with that. And as you're doing that, rather than lightly accelerate, kind of give it some throttle and see if it does it differently. This one, I did notice some awkwardness in the 1 to 2 shift from a stop to go. And then to me, that awkwardness could easily translate to 2 to 3 shift because it's kind of in a different gear than maybe we would be if we were driving a manual. Even our Tiguan seems to do that as well. It's very strange, especially with cruise control on. Behaves very, very different with cruise control on as far as what gear it should be in. So play around with it. It seems to be common enough that there's a whole thread on it. We know how that goes in forums. It could be problematic. It could be not a big deal. But I'm going to try one and see, and maybe I'll ping my VW peeps and see if they got any more information, because I just didn't find anything in the VW information. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Questions, comments, you know what to do. Be sure to keep the emails and questions coming. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe right here on YouTube or over on the blog at humblemechanic.com. Remember about the audio-only shows. Check out the Crew membership. It's a great way to score some banging discounts on stuff you're buying anyway, so why not get some money off, right? That's how I look at it. That's how I set it up. That's why I set it up. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course on Snapchat. And I hope you saw the Instagram post I made on Saturday about the Mark V that I just picked up. That, boy, does this car need some work. We're gonna go through this one top to bottom, talk about the problems, and I'm gonna show you guys a bunch of solutions to that. Then it's going on to its next life somewhere else, which should be pretty cool. It's a cool partnership with FCP Euro, and it's nice that that's finally come about. Guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.